Good afternoon everybody, and thank you for staying for this later session. My name is Joy Carey. I manage the digitisation process internally here in PRONI. So all the collection of records that you will have been introduced to this morning, they've all started off life as, well, the ones that started off life as original paper, physical records, have passed through my team, and that's enabled the creation of the resources that you've been looking at today. So during my talk today, I'm going to first of all talk very briefly how that happens from the physical object or record right through to the digital on screen that you can see. And then after that, I'm going to move on to a favourite collection of mine, which has become available through this whole online access programme. And it's a collection of photographs, as Stephen's just said, that were taken just at the start of the First World War by the Belfast photographer Alexander Robert Hogg, whom I'm sure a lot of you will have heard and seen images of before. So I'll start off just with the drier part probably of the talk, which is the digitisation process. So first of all, obviously we have to decide what collection and what it is we're going to digitise, and that in itself can obviously be quite a large task to undertake. PRONI has millions of records and some very big collections of records, so there's always a debate over what is worthy and what should be digitised first. So after that, we do a lot of preparation work that needs to take place before the scanning or the photography can actually start. So first of all, myself, I usually take a condition assessment of the collection just by sampling it, just to determine the general state and condition of the records. If I find that things are in a fragile state, I will get the help of a conservator who will come and give a proper condition assessment of the material. Often more fragile items need to be looked at by a conservator and potentially treated on as well. Sorry, I should have moved that slide on. Sometimes the conservators actually undertake stabilisation work before the item can be digitised, because of course we don't want to damage the original in any way when we undertake this process. That's just a few photographs there of the conservators at work, some cleaning work going on, and the restitching of a book and this type of thing. Now, after that, cataloguing. We have to ensure that the cataloguing is complete before we digitise a collection, and preferably that things are catalogued to item level. Once we start creating images of the records, we need to know how to name those and to make sure that they cross-reference back to their original material. So it's very important that we have a unique reference for everything that's digitised. Then after that, we select the pieces of equipment that are most suitable to undertake the digitisation. We don't want to cause any damage to the original, as I've said, so that we want to make sure that it's handled and touched by a human or by a machine as little as possible. We select the equipment for each individual item according to the size of it and also what format it's in, whether it's a map, for example, or a bound volume, and how fragile it is as well. All our equipment we've purchased so that we can enable the best possible quality images to be taken as master preservation copies of everything, and those will be stored in our digital repository system, which another team in PRONI are managing. We try to instill amongst all staff what's called the SOAP principle in the trade of digitisation, which is to scan once for all purposes. That means that that document, that original, only has to be handled and be put through that process once, so that the original can go back in the stores and remain in the best possible condition that we can keep it in. We currently have map scanners, book scanners, microfilm scanners, and specialist overhead mounted digital cameras. But if anybody wants any more information on that type of side of things, just speak to me afterwards. Quality assurance. So after we have actually photographed the items, we have got hundreds of images then. One book can be hundreds of images alone. So we have to apply very good records management principles to how we manage those files once they're created. They have to be stored in folders that are meaningful to people and that people will be able to find things. The quality assurance process is to ensure that all the content is there in each image, that there isn't any focusing issues, any over or under exposure, and we check that all the file naming conventions have been adhered to and that type of thing. So it's quite a long process, and we quite often use Photoshop software, such as on the screen here, and make adjustments to things as necessary. we can in fact enhance the readability of some of the documents using Photoshop, although we try and keep away from that as much as possible. But if that's what the user would want out of the record, is to be able to read it, then we make sure that that's possible. Sometimes we will quality assure every single image, especially in the example of church records, which we would just borrow in to digitise, and we have to return them back out to the churches. So we would quality assure every single image, because the last thing we want is things to be left out. But if it's records such as the ones you've been looking at today, which we hold here in PRONI, we'd do that more maybe as a sample of every 10 or every 100, depending on the nature of the job itself. Then from the master copies that we've created, which are very large, high-resolution files, we can derive smaller access copies, which are usually JPEGs or PDFs, depending on the access system and what's required on screen for the user. And then, I wrote this morning, I've written one line: the access copies of the digitised records are processed by our digital preservation team and attached to the online catalogue for the public to view. Now, that's just one sentence, but it covers a mass of work and a lot of problems, and there's
10 years of development.
Other staff that I'm glad aren't sitting here today, because they would scoff at my brevity. But there's a lot that goes into that, and then here you can see, and this takes us quite nicely through to Alexander Hogg, because this is what you will see on our online catalogue if you were to go and look at these photographs. So you go and browse for the LA archive, which, as Stephen has said, is for authority records, and LA7 is the Belfast Corporation, and that's where this collection resides within PRONI. So here we are, the man himself. So moving on to Alexander Hogg. These are wonderful. They're 2 photograph albums of Hogg's work, and they're now available for you to access online. Hogg himself was born in Tully West, which is a townland near Saintfield in County Down. He was born in 1870. He worked for his uncle in York Street as an apprentice druggist. His uncle was James Hogg, and it was quite common for people working in the chemist trade to become photographers because of the chemicals and the developing and that type of area of work. And of course, even today, you find developing outfits and services in chemists. So you can see him here. This is Hogg in the middle, the central figure in the photograph, and this is from the YMCA Camera Club, and he was 28 in this image. The Hogg material we have digitised is actually catalogued as the Belfast Corporation Archive, and it's in the sub-series which relates to surveyors and engineers' records. Both of the albums contain around 100 original photographic prints, which Hogg was commissioned to take by the Belfast Corporation. Now at this time, and I suppose at all times, most professional photographers make their money and make their living through taking studio portraits. Hogg, plus 2 of his very well-known contemporaries, Robert Welch and William Green, they worked mainly outside of the studio and did commissions for industry and trade. The bulk of Hogg's work, actually, which resides with the National Museums of Northern Ireland in Cultraw, and that shows him as a photographer in the main of local trade and industry, as I've said. For example, shipbuilding, he was the official photographer of the other Belfast shipyard, which was Workman, Clark and Company, and he also leaves behind photographic records of linen manufacture and other industrial processes. So Hogg's brief for this collection that he took from the City Council of the time was to photograph the inner city streets, buildings and slum housing which were to be demolished to enable urban regeneration work to be carried out. So the images were to provide a visual photographic record of the various properties, which were mainly older houses which would be affected by the improvement schemes undertaken by the corporation, and this was under the Belfast Improvement Order of 1910 and the Belfast Corporation Act of 1911. But as you can see, although Hogg was asked to photograph merely the streets and the buildings, the majority of these images capture the people who lived in the streets, and they provide a fascinating view of the social history in the inner city areas of Belfast just before the outbreak of the Great War. If I go on now to explain something more about Hogg, what I found out about his other photographic interests, it helps to shed some light on why he might have wanted to include these poor residents of the streets in the photographs. In March of this year, I attended a talk at Queen's University, and it was given by Lucy Ray, and she's a PhD student of social history, and she is actually researching and studying about Alexander Hogg. So I've learned that Hogg was also commissioned by charity organisations, and more specifically the Belfast Central Mission, to take photographs which were used as tools to record and improve the life and living conditions of the city's poor. Here you can see Hogg circled in this photograph of the staff of the Belfast Central Mission. This is from the archive that resides there at the mission. The mission was founded in 1889 by the Reverend Crawford Johnson as part of the Methodist Church's response to problems inherent in Victorian inner city life. By 1903, the mission had attained premises in Grosvenor Hall, and it was engaging in a variety of mission efforts in the city and employing a number of staff. So this photo, and it's very interesting because it was taken by Alexander Hogg, but Alexander Hogg's also in it, shows the staff of the mission at that time in 1903. So he was obviously a skilled photographer because he's managed to manipulate the glass plate to include himself afterwards. There's a couple of other of the people in the photograph, and when you look at it closely, it does look like they're maybe cut out and stuck on, you know. So yes, he was a very skilled photographer. But we also, because of this, we see that he obviously felt an affinity with their work and their cause, because he wasn't in fact on their books as a member of staff. He was commissioned to do work for them, but he obviously wanted to be included in this image, and he went to great efforts to make sure he was in the image, so that, you know, points to the fact that he might have had an affinity with their work. Now, during Lucy Ray's paper, I was first introduced to this little boy, who is Arthur Grosvenor Hall. He was photographed, as you see here, before and after, and being taken in by the Belfast Mission by Alexander Hogg. Around 3 years of age, Arthur was reportedly found by a Miss Spence, who was a mission sister. He was deserted in a lodging house, left there a year before by a man, supposedly his father, who never returned to claim him. He was baptised by the mission superintendent at a Sunday evening service. The register reads, "He was baptised Arthur Grosvenor Hall. Arthur after Mr. Deadman, who was the agent for Bernardo's Ever Open Door Receiving House in Belfast, and Grosvenor Hall to signify that he was adopted by the Central Mission." Now, Lucy also explained to us after that Arthur's descendants are alive and well and living in the United States. They were, however, very surprised to hear from her that they're named after a building in Belfast, and that they don't have a rather, you know, nice surname, double-barreled through more usual means. So the archives at the Belfast Central Mission contain many more of these types of before and after photographs of orphan children, and they were used to advertise for charitable donations to be made from Belfast's more affluent citizens, and it's something that was done by Bernardo's as well. With this in mind, so we return to our PRONI's collection of Hogg images of the slums for Belfast Corporation. So as you can see, most of them include people, generally women and children, arranged in groups in the foreground. The children would have been playing in the streets when Hogg turned up with his camera equipment, and they would have been intrigued as to what a very well-dressed stranger would have been doing with a big tripod, a box of prepared glass plate negatives, a large camera and a black cloth hood. He would have perhaps had the option to shoo them all away, you know, to make the job easier for himself. But I like to think, with his knowledge of the plight of the poor in Belfast through his work for the mission, he instead befriended the children and encouraged them to stand in organised groups in the shots. Indeed, with long exposure times of several seconds for a camera from this era, he would have been trying to either keep the kids as still as possible or to get them to clear off out of the shot entirely. Or otherwise it could have simply been that he was trying to challenge himself rather than having just a mundane task of photographing the buildings and the streets. I like to think he was making a conscious effort to sensitively show the humanity of his subjects as a platform to raise awareness of the plight of others, just like his work that he did for the mission. Whatever his motives, the photographs have a dual quality. They not only capture the spaces that no longer exist, but the individuals who may not otherwise have been recorded, those that were far removed from a pattern of life that indulged in studio portraits. just as an aside for a moment, I'd like to briefly mention some other interesting details that we've been able to see up close through the digitisation process, and this wouldn't have been able to see these details just with the prints, which are, you know, maybe just 30 by 20 centimetres, that kind of size. Here we can see when we were able to zoom in digitally on these newspaper hoardings from an image that's on the 11th of February in 1915. It mentions the Lusitania prior to her sinking on the 7th of May 1915. Also mentioned is the death of the 6th Marquess of Londonderry, Charles Stuart Vane Tempest Stuart, who died on the 8th of February in 1915. And again here we've got an image of Chapel Lane, and on the side of McComish and Shaw's tea depot we have reference in the news to how Kaiser Wilhelm was deluding his army, along with more local football headlines like "Buck Up, Celtic and Distillery expect 2 trophies." So nice little details that we found. Moving back to Hogg's Central Mission connection, very recently, only a couple of months back, PRONI took in the papers of a Miss Jeannie McElwain, who was the organist for Belfast's Central Mission. I think it was her granddaughter that arrived with the records for us. Included in the deposit was this photograph, and it's by Hogg, of the members of the mission with Jeannie front and centre playing the organ for a Sunday open-air service on the steps of the Custom House in Belfast. The photograph is an enlargement. If you were to order out the original, it's approximately A2 in size, so that's 40 by 60 centimetres or 16 by 14 inches in old money. So in our digitisation unit staff were amazed and fascinated by how at this time, it's taken in 1901 I think it's dated, how Hogg was able to produce an image of this size. This, incidentally, has also been digitised. It's available to view digitally inside the building. So with a little bit more research, I discovered that Hogg had actually won prizes for his lantern slides and his ability to manipulate photographic apparatus to enable technical advances in the art form. So he was particularly interested in flashlight photography and also the creation of enlarging equipment. This photograph, where he's lying on the floor of the Belfast City Hall to photograph the dome, the interior of the dome, it shows his ingenuity and resourcefulness, because he's created a camera stand to enable him to photograph up into the inside of the dome at City Hall. And that was another commission of work that he did for the Belfast Corporation, and his work is actually used in the official opening brochure of the City Hall, which was in 1906. And on the right of the page here, I've just shown his attractive Celtic Revival style letterhead with shamrock and round tower, and it reads "Photographic Specialist, Lanternist and Cinematographer." And the original envelope, this is in PRONI, contains photos that he took of Glendinning and McLeish Embroidery School in Maghera. So those are also available. They haven't been digitised, but they're available to view in PRONI if you're interested in Hogg and his work. And then my final slide was to be just a plug for our Flickr site, and to let you know that there's hundreds more photographs that have been digitised in PRONI that are available if you go to this website, and you're welcome to have a look at what we've posted up there. And there's the ability, because it's social media, to comment and favourite things and that type of thing. Is there a bit of time you want me to talk about a few other things? If I can find the slides. Just bear with me. So, as well as the large collections of records which you've looked at this morning and the Hogg photographs, there are various little bits and pieces that we've also digitised in the last couple of years that are being made available digitally to you. This is a lovely, vivid and colourful one, and we don't get much vivid and colourful in PRONI, to be honest. So we were very pleased to see this. It comes from the collection of Dickie Hunter, Dr. Richard Hunter, who worked in Queen's University as a lecturer of anatomy and embryology, and he was an examiner in anatomy for the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland. Now, besides his work in the university, he had an interest and love for animals, which was well known, and he was made curator of the Belfast Zoo in 1937. He caused delight and amazement by entering a cage with 2 fully grown lionesses. And then in 1938 he went to England and he met with the Chipperfield circus family, and the opportunity arose for him to be a stand-in ringmaster. He was so good that Chipperfield asked him if he would consider becoming a full-time ringmaster for their famous circus. He declined the request, but the die had been cast, and he decided that in order to fulfil his new interest, he would have to open a circus in Belfast, and he did. So we have taken in his records, and there's many very interesting photographs as well in that collection if you're interested in images of what goes on behind the scenes in a circus. But the group that we've digitised recently are these wonderful, vividly colourful, as I've said, posters, and they're circuses from all over Europe and North America, and they date from 1963 to 75. So that's a more recent acquisition. There's a selection of prize-winning photographs relating to Northern Ireland taken by members of the Northern Ireland Photographic Association, NIPA. 46 out of the 50 can be viewed on site digitally now. There's a few of them have copyright restrictions. Then here we've got, if you've got any connections to the Hazlitt family or know anyone that has, we have now got a digital copy of the family history of the Hazlitt and Hazlitt with a Z families of Ireland, written by Mr. Alfred Hazlitt, based on his own private research. So it contains genealogical information on Sir James Horner Hazlitt, Thomas Hazlitt and the Liffick Hazlitts of County Londonderry, and William Carew Hazlitt, among others. I feel a bit like your man on Pointless, trying to read everything off the screen. The collection covers all spelling variations of this name, occurring in Ireland from around 1600 right up to 1960, so if that's a name that crops up in your family tree, it's worth taking a look at. We also have digitised this beautifully illuminated parchment. Incidentally as well, it's also, the border was the inspiration for the cafe tabletops in our PRONI cafe. You might recognise some of that, the birds and the foliage and things. So, digitisation has allowed public viewing of this, which would have been closed because it's just so, so precious. So James Hamilton came from Dunlop in Ayrshire in Scotland. He acted as an agent for James I in his negotiation to succeed to the English throne. In recognition of these services, James I granted him lands in Ulster and confirmed him in possession of lands in County Down in particular. So on the 4th of May 1623, the King created him Viscount Clandeboy, and on the 7th of June 1647, Charles I created his son, another James Hamilton, Earl of Clanbrassil, and both the patents, and they're very handsomely illustrated, as you can see. They're both present in this archive. So that's from the Clanmorris papers, I should say. Now we have the Presbyterian Psalmbooks. These were very kindly deposited for us to digitise by Valerie Adams, who you heard from earlier this morning. So if you want any more information about these, speak to Valerie, basically. Yeah, they were loaned to us to digitise and digitally accession, but they're very beautiful little books. 4 of them. You can see they give some details of just, I think it must be, stringed instruments and the different notes that were played, and also they give the tunes of various psalms and musical notation, and they're beautifully illustrated in watercolour. Now we have also the sketchbooks of Constance Gore-Booth. These were created by her in the years between 1883 and 1896, and this was just before she studied in the Slade School of Art in London. It was at Slade where she met her future husband, Casimir Markowitz, who was a Polish count, and in 1900 she became Countess Markowitz, who I'm sure you'll have heard of. So it was not to art that she turned finally, but to Irish nationalism. And in March 1908, on St Patrick's Night, she attended her last ball at Dublin Castle, and 11 days later she attended her first Sinn Féin meeting. When rebellion broke out in Dublin on Easter Monday 1916, Countess Markowitz, in her uniform of the Irish Citizens' Army, was posted in St Stephen's Green as second in command under Commandant Mallon. Following the rebel surrender, she was court-martialed. Like the rest of her colleagues, she was sentenced to death. It was later commuted to a life sentence of penal servitude, and that was solely on the basis of her sex. So that's Constance Markovitz, which a lot of you will have heard and read about before, but there's some beautiful drawings in there, and it just shows her ability and her flair for art. This is one that I find highly entertaining. I hope you will too. It's a journal which details the journey of John Brown, who was from, where was he from? Let me see. Got it here somewhere. Moneymore from County Londonderry, and he inherited property in Australia from his uncle, a Dr. John Harris. This diary covers the years 1840 to 1845 when he emigrated to Australia, and obviously it was a voyage on a ship. And then he talks a little bit in the middle of the diary about his life when he was in Australia, and then he journeys back. I went through the whole thing trying to find out why did he go back, but couldn't find out why. So if anybody knows, I would be very interested to hear. So this little excerpt is from his journey to Australia. It says, "This day is fine, and she's going northeast at the rate of half a mile in the hour, bearing on her 13 sails. There are 3 vessels inside of us, 2 of them bound for Sydney and the other for Port Phillip, which is now Melbourne." He goes on to tell the tale of a pet wallaby on board that someone forgot to feed, and when he was found dead, the captain was in great anger about it.
Oh, dear.
Also at the dinner, the captain said that he could boast of Thomas Harris and John Brown, the writer of the book, as they were 2 very steady men, but Robert, he thought, would not be long in Sydney until he would do something that would get him put up in the chain gang with the convicts. I just love the whole feel of this, you know, just imagine this going on board the ship. Then when he was in Australia, this is from Saturday the 20th, I think this is, I'm not sure which year, but anyway. "This day is fine. In the morning I had to get on my horse and ride through the bush to collect the cattle all together. The horse being hard to manage, he run me against a tree and knocked me off. I was cut a good deal in the face and had to keep in the house for 5 days. So can you imagine? There was a man passed into town this day, and he stated that he was robbed about 1 mile out of the town of the sum of £20. So that's what life was like if you went and tried to make your fortunes in the outback in Australia. And then this is from his journey back. "The day is very rough and weighty rains. Every single entry starts with a weather forecast, or a weather, what the weather was like. She is going south at the rate of 5 knots, bearing on her 6 sails. The second mate caught 1 albatross. It measured across the wings 10 foot and 1/2. So, wow. This was real life. It's not a movie. So fabulously rich descriptions, and they really bring to life experiences of an immigrant in the mid-19th century. And that's all the stuff I've got for you today. So thank you very much for listening, and thanks for